welcome to the second webinar in our 2026 Women in Leadership Executive Speaker Series, with this one titled Strategic Voices, Women Leading Public Policy Change. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, founding director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project and an extension professor of leadership at Utah State University. I'm the host and will be the panel moderator today. And this event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. And we strengthen Utah and its residents by first producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research. Second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And then third, convening events and trainings like this that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. And thank you so much to our sponsors, the USU Extension and the Utah Women in Leadership Project. And we also connect with a Boulder Way Forward as a sponsor as well. So I want to start, Natalie, by introducing you, and then I'll dive right into some questions. And then when Congresswoman Maloy joins us, I'll introduce her as well. So Natalie Gochnour is the director of the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah and associate dean at the David Eccles School of Business. And she is one of Utah's most respected voices in public policy and economics, known for her ability to bridge divides and foster collaboration across business and government and community sectors. In her role at the Gardner Institute, she leads efforts to provide data-driven insights that guide decision-making and strengthen Utah's future. And Natalie also serves as the chief economist for the Salt Lake Chamber. Her distinguished career includes service to 3 Utah governors and leadership in leadership roles in the George W. Bush administration, where she worked at the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Health and Human Services. And I know this about Natalie because I've been reading her work forever. She's a prolific writer and commentary writer as well, and she has published hundreds of columns and co-hosts both sides of the aisle on Utah Public Radio. And she's widely recognized as a civic leader committed to advancing prosperity and informed dialogue in Utah. Natalie, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for that very kind introduction, Susan.
Oh. Well, I've known your work for a couple of decades. I think you've known some of my work for a couple of decades too. The years go by, don't they?
Yeah, I feel like we've
Natalie,
been partners in a lot of
yeah,
good things.
thank you. And so, Natalie, you've navigated the complex leadership, many complex leadership paths in Utah. What experiences or turning points most shaped your approach to public service and policy making? I'm giving you some good questions today, so not easy ones.
Yeah, Susan, when I first started my career, so I'm fresh out of the University of Utah with an economics degree. I'm working in Governor Bangerter's office in the planning and budget office. And one of my first big assignments was dealt with the Bureau of Land Management's draft environmental impact statement on wilderness areas in our state.
Oh.
So imagine you get a degree in economics, you're kind of natural resource economics trained, and they just had, I can't remember how many volumes, but let's say it was 14 volumes of wilderness study area EISs. And I was asked to just review, it's a draft report, but review the economics of each of these study areas. Anyway, the reason it was so formative for me is that issue has still not been resolved. So this is like 87, 86, something like that. And we still, as a country, as a state, have not really cracked the code on wilderness designation in Utah. So I consider that really formative because I became quite frustrated by the political extremes, the paralysis that we have as a society when competing interests can't figure it out.
Yeah. And that was in the 80s.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
we haven't
exactly.
resolved that, Natalie.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I consider it quite formative because I learned really early that I have this passionate love for Utah's out of doors. And
Mm,
yet, some of the people that were advocating for it were getting in the way of us making progress.
uh,
And so that I really took note, in that.
yeah.
And I just find that really I was immediately drawn to more balance,
Mm.
more mutual accommodation, more productive, middle kind of thinking.
What a good project to get on your plate right out of college, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Not a surface level project. And that's probably informed a lot of how you think about things, even from that. I love that example. Thank you so much. So
Mhm.
I'm going to throw in a bit of a gender question here. Research shows that women often lead with collaboration, long-term thinking, community-centered decision making. And we know, of course, men that do as well, but the research continues to show women bring those things. I've really seen that in you through the years, Natalie. How do you see these strengths actually showing up in the work that you do?
Mm. Well, and I'd add another strength, just incredibly competent.
Mhm.
And where my mind goes, Susan, is I think of a lot of female leaders that I've had the privilege of working closely with. Katie Welke is one of those. Katie was the CEO of Primary Children's Hospital for many
Uh,
years. And I knew her before she was CEO and then when she was CEO. And I'll never forget, she was like the chief nursing officer
mm,
at one point. That's her background is in nursing. But this was during the sort of Obamacare, Affordable Care Act debates. And I remember one time in a board meeting asking her, where does Intermountain Healthcare stand on this important public policy issue? And she just immediately squared her shoulders, turned to me, and delivered to me their posture, their policy on this with such
interesting.
incredible um, just understanding of the policies. And I think a real ability to have a human touch on something that was a technical issue.
Hmm.
And I just really was so impressed. And I've just seen women like that time and time again who have all of the competence and then also have the ability to communicate it and guide us towards consensus. Heidi Walker does
Yeah.
that at the Salt Lake Chamber. She's like a secret behind all of the success of our business community is Heidi Walker working behind the scenes, connecting CEOs, connecting policymakers. And then on a national scale, this sounds kind of interesting, but I was listening to a podcast on the way in this morning where she was featured. But Condi Rice,
Uh,
former national security
yeah.
advisor and Secretary of State, uh, has an important role with the Hoover Institute at Stanford. But I've followed her career lockstep and just have been so impressed with her abilities.
I love that. And what you've talked about are not always put in the traditional female strengths of collaboration and those kinds of things, which we use
Mhm.
all the time.
Mhm.
And sometimes people think that that's all women are good for. And you're saying this confidence and competence comes out that in addition to all of those other things make a really powerful leader.
Yeah,
And not just a woman leader. I
yeah.
should say a real powerful leader.
Yeah, Susan Condi Rice has this amazing quote. She actually said it when she was visiting Salt Lake City a year or so ago, and I wrote it down. But we often say that you can't be what you can't see.
Yep. Yep.
And she said, if I had waited to look for a female African American Soviet expert, I would have never become one.
Oh,
And I think it's so magical, this thought that, yeah, you can't be what you can't see, but also don't let it hold you back.
yep.
She rose to the highest levels of international,
Yep.
policy because of her competence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a good example. Thank you so much. So Celeste is still not here, so we'll just keep moving. And I'm going to ask you, and then we'll get to some other questions. But I want to ask you one more question, really about, and let me just back this up with I know I'm asking you to brag a little bit, which is hard, and social norms say women shouldn't do that. But again, we need to shift those social norms because it's important for women to talk about our accomplishments. It's easier for us to talk about other people's accomplishments. So
Mhm.
so I'm just mentioning that. Here's my question. Can you share a moment when your strategic approach as a leader shifted the trajectory of a policy conversation or outcome? I know you do that often, but is there
Mhm.
one moment that comes to mind?
I can think of a very applied one. Um, so I'm working at the Salt Lake Chamber. Um, City Creek Center is being envisioned, maybe even started construction. Taubman is the major, real estate arm that runs the retail operation. We know that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints funded and sponsored this development. Um, they want to put a bridge over Main Street, a
Oh, yeah.
pedestrian bridge. Everyone's walked that now. City ordinance didn't allow that.
Mhm.
There's a thing in urban planning where you don't want to keep people above the street. You want to enliven the street and have them on street level. And
Oh,
so it also, in a climate like ours, it can create shade and you can have, slippery spots. And a lot of people were upset that this retail development was trying to create a fortress mall that, you came in and you were stuck in it. And President or Rocky Anderson was mayor of the city at the time. I'm working at the chamber, and there's just sort of a conflict between the city and the developer.
hmm.
And I just remember being a part of a team of, productive thinking where we said, how you do it matters. And the
Hmm.
design of City Creek Center was changed to have that pedestrian bridge be see-through. So you could still have your view
Oh,
shed
yeah.
of Ensign Peak, because that was one of the issues. They put um, they put stairs and, everything on both sides of the bridge. So you have escalators. So you
Oh,
have the ability to be street level. And they had a design competition for what
oh,
the
I love that.
thing would look like. Anyway, for me, it was just sort of this thing where, yeah, you want to have people be on the street, you want street life, but there was a safety issue with a light rail line going right through the middle of this
Yeah,
development. And in the end, I think they did a really nice
yeah,
job at finding mutual accommodation.
yeah.
And I played a role in that. And that's a really
I love
applied
that.
example of something I feel like I've helped with.
Yeah, I love that because sometimes we do get stuck into either or, like but there's always other options. There's
Yeah, the
always other.
planning the planning director at Salt Lake City at the time, I remember meeting with him and he said, Natalie, his name was Louis Zinguzzi. And Louis said to me, Natalie, with goodwill, anything is possible.
I like that.
And we started coming at this with goodwill and came up with a great solution.
I think that's an approach we need to remember in 2026 that
For sure.
we just often, if we go with what's natural for us, sometimes we go forward with an assumption that we're on opposite sides instead
Mhm.
of there's goodwill space. Well, thank you so much. So I'm going to ask you, I love this question, and I know you'll have an interesting answer. How do you balance the need for bold action with the realities of our complex landscape today? So there's this balancing. Oftentimes we use that word for work and life, but this is balancing with doing public policy, doing the work we need to. But
Mhm.
it's a tricky landscape in
Right,
Utah and nationally and in the world.
right. Well, Susan, where I go is I go to the evidence. I go to the data
Mhm.
on questions like this. So there's absolute compelling data about certain courses of action. We
Mhm.
know that we need to focus on third grade reading. We must be
Mhm.
proficient at third grade reading to have a successful economy down the road. And the evidence is so compelling that I think, that's where you go. You speak out on the things where the evidence is eminently clear. The value of post-secondary education. That's another
Yeah.
example
Yeah.
of the evidence is absolutely clear that you have lower unemployment, higher wages, greater social engagement, more likely
And
to
more
vote.
self-sustaining, self-reliant families,
Yes,
I mean,
yes, yes,
all
yes.
everything.
Yeah, and so I don't, I think there's areas where um, the evidence still needs to be shown, but there are things that we know. And
Yeah.
I think that when I'm forced with an issue of this is a complex landscape, how do I know whether to speak out? I think when the evidence is
Yeah.
clear, you let the data be your guide.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you do that. I'm a believer in the data as
Well, and I
well.
think our state really responds to that well. I
Yeah.
find our state quite data driven.
Yeah.
There can be a lot of posturing before, but in the end, if the data's on your side, the state typically follows in suit.
Yeah. I found that too. There's a lot of people that do read the reports that we put out, and really dig into those and ask questions. And I know
Mhm.
you have, if people aren't familiar with the Kim C. Gardner Institute, just so much good data. Just go to the website, search it, go to the website on so many different things, but definitely demographics and other kinds of things as well. Thank you for that question. In a follow up, for that complexity question, let me ask you this. Like, what advice would you have for emerging leaders? We have a lot of folks online, and people will watch this video after, who really want to influence our systems, but feel overwhelmed by the complexity. I mean, even the legislative process is complex. I mean,
Mhm.
it's so complex, but even, other parts of government, but the system and communities and all of that, we want to make a difference. A lot of us, more and more of us. What
Right.
would you advise?
Oh boy. I learned something during COVID that I think has been really helpful to me. If everyone can go back to with me just for a minute, be in March of what is it, 2020?
2020.
Yeah,
Yes, I remember
March
it
of
well.
2020. And it feels like everything's fallen apart.
Mm, yeah.
It just is a stunning reality. And I remember several people that are really important community leaders were chatting with me, and they were all saying the same thing. We need a plan. We
Yeah.
just got to have a plan. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just need a plan. And then it was Governor Levitt who taught me during this time. It was during COVID. He and I have a long-standing friendship, but it was during COVID that he taught me this notion that you just need to be directionally correct and then iterate around that plan. And that led to, in our state, a series of economic plans for COVID that was called Utah Leads Together. There was part one, part two. We did
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
5 volumes of it. And every time we were directionally correct, but we were iterating as we learned more and the evidence became more clear. So, what I would say to people in a complex environment is have a plan, have a meaning and purpose, direction for where you're headed, and then just iterate. So you're trying to make a difference on Capitol Hill. You got to have relationships. Make those relationships. Some of them turn sour. Get another relationship. You're iterating.
You have to do
And
that sometimes.
yeah, and I just think that in the end, it's momentum, it's forward motion, it's moving towards energy that
Yeah.
is where real progress happens.
And
And
and this whole I've studied, of course, so much research around women and girls and how we're socialized to be more than men, more perfectionistic. And one of the issues sometimes is that we're really brought up to try and have everything perfect
mhm,
before we take that first step. And you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, that you put together this general plan at least, um, and you start moving, not
yes.
waiting till it's perfect. Yeah, is that
Yeah,
what
you're
you're
saying
saying?
that right. And the other thing, this is just me. I don't know that this works for everybody, but I find professionally some people are motivated by ambition
Mm,
and
yeah,
some are motivated by destiny. And I'm very much in the destiny camp. In
Huh.
other words, I believe that doors open and I walk through them,
Mm.
and another door opens and I walk through it. And so much of my career has been just taking steps, through the doors that have been opened for me. So right now, I do a lot of economic work. I'm an economist by training, but for about 10 years in my career, I didn't do much economics.
Mm.
I was doing public communications. I managed public affairs at the Environmental Protection Agency. I was dealing with the media every day on
And
environmental
you,
issues. I wasn't doing
but
economics.
but you probably use that now every day in
Sure.
some
Yeah.
ways.
But the way I would say it is I never knew that I would work for a governor that would be asked to be EPA administrator,
Oh, yeah.
or that President Bush would ask him to be Health and Human Services secretary, or that my 13-year-old daughter would benefit from me coming back home and not being a 12-hour workday political appointee. And so you're just, for me, it's more about having, values, and then having the destiny reveal itself. Steve Jobs has a famous way of saying this. He gave this graduation speech at Stanford, and it's a really short speech. I highly recommend it. But he talked about how you can't connect the dots as you're connecting them. You can only connect them when you look backwards.
Oh,
Yeah.
that
And
is so
so,
true.
so we're
Yeah.
all connecting dots every day. And I'm a destiny person. And so I believe those dots, move
Yeah.
towards your, your best future.
And I think it's humbling when you're in a visible role like the one you have to look back and feel like you've gone the right path and that what you did in different parts and learned all connected together. I think I see that from my age. Looking back, I'm feeling a little bit older this year, as we all are. Thank you so much for that. I think I was told that Congresswoman Maloy will join us about noon, so that's in just a few minutes. So hopefully she'll be on then. I'm really intrigued with your comment about destiny. Let me follow up with this. Oh, I lost it. Let me find it again. Um, no, let me go in a different direction. I had it, but then I was looking at you. Um, how about this one? How do you maintain so when you talk about destiny as well, I think there's some times probably that you're talking about of when you want to have and maintain this clarity and purpose. So when you're
Mm.
talking about destiny, sometimes I think there's this purpose in there. So how do you maintain this, your clarity, your purpose, what you believe in, while working in sometimes a really highly polarizing environment or even within a bureaucracy? So
Mhm.
that balancing that purpose, that call, I use the word call a lot, that what makes sense to move forward with all of that. You do that in such stride. At least I when I see you, you're doing that so
Yeah.
well.
Well, so I guess what you're saying is in a professional environment, you can have so much bureaucracy
Yep.
or these pressures, very polarized, those sorts of things. I'm firmly believe in approaching your career, in my case, public policy, from a very well-grounded
Mm,
position. So what do I mean by that? I don't feel alone as
mm,
I'm, working with policy leaders or on Capitol Hill. I don't feel alone. I'm grounded in the people that are around me, that support me. One of the great blessings I've had, and not everyone will, can say this, but I've had incredible bosses and mentors, Susan.
yeah.
I
You
mean,
have I know you've
I
talked about
mean,
them in other
Rich
settings.
McKeon
Yeah.
and Mike Levitt are just incredible mentors to me. Rich was Mike Levitt's longtime chief of staff. Lane Beatty, who led the chamber when I was there, is just a remarkable human being. Taylor Randall was
Yeah.
my dean at the Eccles School, now is the president of the University of Utah, one of the greatest leaders I've ever worked for. Now, note they're all men. That's
Yes, they
interesting,
are.
isn't it? But I count them as incredible, leaders, and they inspire me. And so, how do I stay grounded? It's with my family.
Mm,
It's with the
mm.
things I do outside of work. In the off winter season, I'm hiking every weekend with my husband. We spend a lot of time up in the Utah mountains.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I'm a skier in the wintertime. Of course,
Oh,
I have a couple of children and a grandson. So you cannot let work be your life.
mm,
You cannot do that. Work
that's
is um, work is a way you serve,
mm,
but it's not your
I love
identity
that.
and the like.
So you brought up these men who have been just powerful mentors, and I'm sure you know the conversation about mentorship versus sponsorship, and some of those things. Give us a couple of like how and from men,
Mhm.
sometimes, not always, is different. What were just even little things that you would say that they did that gave you confidence, that gave you, whether it's mentoring or sponsorship, that really gave you a boost either from inside or in your career? What did that
Mhm.
look like?
Well, I mean, I feel uncomfortable kind of mentioning it, but I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the most difficult times in my professional career was when I was working as Mike Levitt's deputy for policy and communications. I'm his spokesperson, and he's resigning as governor and going to go work in the Bush administration. And I'm going with him. So I'm simultaneously trying to manage, from a communication point of view, a policy point of view, a resignation from a governor's office, a confirmation hearing in Washington, and moving myself and my family to DC.
Wow.
You've got all those. Oh, and then we had also Eileen Walker coming in as a governor. So we had
Yep.
also an inauguration that we're trying to plan. And
But this is like in a month or two. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
this is
You
not a
just got all
big.
this going simultaneously. And I'll never forget Rich McKeon, who was chief of staff, coming to me and saying, "How can we help?" And he had someone box up my office for me. He had it delivered to my house. Um, in moving to Washington and working at EPA, he fought for the highest salary that I could qualify
Oh,
for because he knew I was going to have so many expenses, bringing my family back and until they could get there flying back and forth. But it just meant so much to me that my boss
wow.
recognized my sacrifices
Mm.
and
And
filled
you
in for me.
knew.
Well, and so it's a lesson for me as a leader, right? Because now I'm essentially running an enterprise, and I have people that have special needs with their family situation or even just their development as a
Yeah.
professional.
Yeah.
And I've had people care for me, so I need to care for others.
Ah, and that's this is probably too personal to ask, but I'm like, did you have any? That was it must have been a shocker for like your family, like to uproot them and move them.
Sure.
But you must have had, they must have been a supportive family. They knew
Oh
mom,
yeah, my daughter
mom
always
needed to do this.
it's a famous family story of being at a Del Taco on Ninth East when we broke the news to our kids.
Oh no.
They don't like Del
Del
Taco very
Taco.
much because they don't want to be uprooted. I think my son was like 9, less of a big deal to him, and my daughter maybe 11 or something. But yeah, it definitely was a sacrifice, and
Mm.
it's another bit of information I got. I loved working in Washington. It was my
Oh,
dream job.
mm.
And I didn't stay Levitt's entire time, and it was for family reasons.
Yeah.
But I had
Yeah.
someone tell me, it was another mentor, Charlie Johnson. Charlie's no longer living, but he's also a former Levitt chief of staff. But he told me one time it's better to leave too early than too late.
Ah,
And it's a
yeah,
really beautiful advice, right? So he's
it
basically saying
is.
you're in Washington and you've got this 13-year-old daughter and you're not
Yeah,
spending as much time with her.
yeah.
You got a husband that you've relocated and he's a furniture maker and, misses his tools, misses his wood shop. And, and yeah, you could stay here another year or two. but better to leave too early than too
Yeah.
late.
Well, that's a good piece of advice. Yeah. Well, I'm hoping Celeste is going to jump in, but I think I will do her bio right now and
Great.
get that done so that when
Good.
she jumps in, and then we'll just keep going. But let me just tell you, listeners, about Congresswoman Celeste Maloy. She represents Utah's second congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives, a lifelong advocate for land, water, and resource management. She brings deep expertise in public lands policy to her role in Congress. Before her election, Maloy worked as a soil conservationist and with the USDA, and later as a deputy county attorney in Washington County. I had not seen that before. I did not know that piece. And she specializes in public policy law, is what she really focused on. And she also served as legal counsel to Congressman Chris Stewart, advising on legislative and policy matters. And in Congress, Maloy serves on the House Committee on Appropriations and the House Committee on Natural Resources, where she is the vice chair of a subcommittee on Interior, Environment and related agencies. And she also holds leadership roles as the executive vice chair of the Congressional Western Caucus and vice chair of the Colorado River Caucus. And so we've got her. She's still not on. Hopefully she'll be able to join. We knew that this could be a little bit tricky, but when she joins, I'll just mention I've already introduced her so we can have that. But Natalie, you and I could keep talking for a long time. So let's keep going. Um, how do you, I guess the next question I'm really interested is, how do you stay grounded in community needs while working at the state? And then you also worked at the federal level. But I know that if we can't keep grounded in what's going on in the communities, it makes it really hard to push forward public policy in ways that are impactful for everybody, and including
Mhm.
our families. So
Mhm.
how do you do that now in the work that you do in public policy, as well as when you've got all of these other experiences as well from your past?
Well, Susan, I'd make the observation that, in federal service, it's really hard to feel like you're making a difference.
Mm.
I mean, you can, but it's a tricky balance there. Um, I also find local government to be very personal and kind of frustrating.
Oh, okay.
So I'm very
I
much,
thought you were going to say something really positive about
yeah, no,
local.
no, my real, well, and when local, I'm meaning like at the city municipal.
Yeah, yeah,
So the place
okay.
that I really am drawn to is state service.
Mm,
You're right. So my background's economics. I love public finance, tax policy, expenditure policy. And I feel like at the state level, a lot of things get done. And
mm,
so I think everybody, all the, people on the call, you just have to kind of think for yourself, where do I get fulfillment? Where do I feel like I make a difference? Some people are really drawn to the nonprofit sector.
yeah,
Some people are so entrepreneurial and want to
yep.
be in small business. It's just in their nature. For me, I'm really motivated by sort of bigger issues that have an economic tie. Like I
Mm.
could spend a long time talking about how we price water. I
Oh,
could spend a lot of time
I'm not sure
on,
I'd be interested in that
yeah, I can
conversation.
spend a lot of time. What are the economic impacts of hosting a Winter Olympics?
Mm,
Um, I'm very
that would be interesting. Yeah.
very motivated by tax policy, the
Oh,
incentives that we put out there. And so anyway, I think everybody just when you say where, how do you get grounded? How do you be in a place where feel like you're having maximum impact? I think it differs by person for
yeah, yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I'm always drawn to where do you feel energized?
That's true.
And then keep moving towards energy. I meet with students all the time and they're like, what should I major in? Or I'm in a major,
Yeah,
but what should I specialize in? Or what should I do my project on or my thesis on? And I'm like, well, where do you feel energy?
yep.
I'm a huge strengths-based person.
I am too. Yeah.
Yeah, learned very
Yeah.
early that when you focus on your weaknesses, you're just taking on
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
But when you focus where your strengths are, you are propelled forward.
I love that. And I've had students do the same through the years. They're just like, what's a good topic? I'm like, you have to, and a few times I've had students like, I don't have any passions in anything. I'm like, that's so sad. Find your passions. I'm sure you do, right?
Mhm.
But in public policy, this is where what I was just thinking as you were talking. There's something. There's something, whether it's at the local level, in the planning commissions, whether it's in water, in recreation, in whatever, or the county level. We need more women actually engaged at the county level. We have more and more at the local level, but not the county level, and then of course more at the state level. But what connects with you? What issue? There's public policies around. You know public policy better than I, but aren't there policies or implications of public policies engaged in almost everything?
Mhm.
Is that too broad of a statement?
No, public policy is everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that scares people sometimes. The word public policy in that. I love that. Um, so, okay, I'm going to ask you to be a little vulnerable. What
Okay.
leadership lessons have you learned the hard way, and how have they shaped your approach? I
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. Leadership lessons learned the hard way. Well, I think that I think I've had to learn when to not speak up.
Oh,
Isn't that interesting? When,
yeah.
yeah, when by speaking up, I'm just adding to the noise or the um, division. Sometimes you're in settings where,
So it's not going to do any good?
yeah, you sometimes you're in a setting where you feel like you're so right and you want to beat your chest and you want to call out, something that feels wrong or there's an injustice, unfair. And sometimes you just have to hold on and live another day to do it. So if I had to pick an example, I'm trying to think. Um, you asked me to be vulnerable, and it's hard for me to pick a precise example, but I can think of the concept. When you're very knowledgeable about something, like you know the data and you know the issues, it's tempting to just grandstand about it. It's tempting to just be
Yeah.
really clever and say, did you know this? And do you know this? And just put all your facts out there. And sometimes all you're doing is building a wall between you and the person you're
Oh,
trying to persuade. And so I've really had to learn, and this is particularly true because when you work in a governor's office or when you lead, a think tank, you actually know quite a bit. You're
yeah.
seeing a lot. You know your data,
Yeah.
and you're armed with information that can get that other people don't have the luxury of doing all day
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
And so I've actually had to learn to be quiet and to be
Mm.
kind. There's that famous Jeff Bezos speech where he talked about it's easy to be clever, but hard to be kind.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
believe that, that sometimes just being clever means you're putting a knife,
Yeah.
in someone. And being kind is being more willing to listen.
Yeah. I love that. I'm not the best still, but I'm so much better than I used to be. Maybe it's experience through the years in terms
Yeah,
of really looking at a situation and saying, where can I use my voice and where at this point is it not going to make any
right.
difference?
Yeah.
And
You
then
know,
don't try. But I try, even with my kids. Natalie, I'm like, if I just explain the data to them long
mhm,
enough, they'll get
mhm.
it. And sometimes
Yeah.
that doesn't work.
We have at the University of Utah, we have Tim Shriver as one of our impact
Yep.
scholars. And I do a lot of work with Tim. This is, of course, the nephew of President Kennedy. Tammy Pfeiffer is his right-hand
Yep.
person in the Dignity Initiative work. You can see the Congresswoman getting on. But
Hey.
hi, Congresswoman. If I can just complete this real quick
Yeah,
thought, Susan, and then I'll let go. But I
that
learned
sounds
from the
great.
Dignity work that they teach you be curious, not furious.
Oh, that's nice.
Regulate, then debate. Listen to understand. Challenge ideas, don't attack people. Those are the kinds of things that I think are so important. Build up rather than tear down.
Oh,
And
I love that.
that's where we need to be.
We'll be sending a follow-up email to everybody that RSVP'd and were here or weren't able to join. They'll watch it later, but we'll put a link to the Dignity Index in that because I'm a big fan of that as well. And it takes work to keep ourselves in that space. Congresswoman Maloy, I just read your introduction actually just a few minutes ago because I knew we wouldn't have too much time and I wanted to get that out of the way. But we're just talking about sometimes how when we have Natalie and I both work in our data spaces and we know a lot about certain things, and sometimes you just keep quiet when it's not gonna make a big difference. I'm sure you've been in similar situations where it's just not gonna, it's more noise.
Yeah. No, I wish I had that option more often.
Oh,
Um, I sometimes have to comment on things that I'm not really ready to comment on, and I'm
oh,
not sure it's helpful to weigh in on yet. If fools rush in where angels don't dare to trod, I think we're probably all fools in politics because people ask us questions and we have to answer them. Um, but I caught the end of what Natalie was saying about the Dignity Index, and I do think in leadership, the wisest course a lot of times is not to stake out a position before you've heard other people out.
oh,
And
yes.
we've set everything up in the modern world where we have each other's thoughts instantly, and everybody wants to know, you know, I I want to be really careful how I use this example because I don't want to come across as at all insensitive, but I remember, when Charlie Kirk got shot in Utah, that was just shocking to me. I
Yeah.
could not wrap my brain around something like that happening in America, and particularly in Utah. But over the next couple of days, there were all these groups putting out statements that I thought, when did like the third grade knitting club from some elementary school feel like they have to put out a public statement about current events? Um, and so I do think part of leadership is knowing when not to weigh in on something.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, People don't always want your thoughts. That sometimes we unnecessarily draw distinctions between ourselves and other people when we don't have to, and we'd be better off just holding back and giving other people the space to work through their own feelings before we force
Yeah.
a comment or a decision or a confrontation or
Yeah.
whatever.
And sometimes if we wait, I had someone tell me when I did that well one time, he said, for a committee, he said, sometimes you wait and listen, and then when you speak, everybody listens. And so I think there's strategies sometimes to how
Yeah.
much we speak and so forth. I'm going to jump in and ask you, Natalie, and I've had a good conversation. Natalie, if you have other thoughts, please jump in. But I'm going to focus our last minutes together. And really want to have you, Natalie and I were just talking about this, and I think people would appreciate you responding as well. So, you're doing this work, you've done work at the state level, you've done work at the federal level, you're doing work now at the federal level. How do you stay grounded in community needs at the same time as doing all that other work? Because we can get off track, all of us can, from time to time.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that because I get asked about one thing all the time, and it's in a couple of books by authors that I actually really respect, but I very much disagree with them on this. And people always say, was it better? Do you think it was better when members of Congress moved to Washington, D.C. because their spouses all knew each other and their kids went to school together and blah, blah, blah. And I know that that theory's out there. I would vehemently disagree with it for this reason. So I live in Cedar City. I am in Cedar City most weekends. I live with my sister, which, is not the way my mom prayed my life would go. But, I go home and I have to do my laundry and I've got to drag the trash out to the curb on Monday mornings before I go get on a really early morning flight. And I'm at Walmart and at church with the people who live in my community. And that's really important. It's hard. not to stay grounded when, I go to Brody's Tacos to get dinner and somebody stops at my table to tell me about the thing they're concerned about,
No.
how something I voted on is impacting their family. And so I think the key is just staying really involved in your community, keeping those lines of communication open. I think everyone in the state of Utah has my phone number, and most of them use it pretty frequently. And I don't get a whole lot of sleep.
Hey,
But
Congresswoman, I'll bet another way of saying it is you still know the price of a gallon of milk.
yeah, yeah, not that I
That's
can
sort of
ever
the
use a
famous
gallon of
political
milk.
line of, are you in touch with your constituents?
Yeah.
I love that. I want to ask you um, about, bringing people to the table. So here's my question. How do you bring people to the table who may not initially see themselves as part of the solution? I know I'm throwing out not the easiest questions, but
This
I'm
is
not a
great.
fluff person. So,
Diamonds shine the brightest under the harshest light. So let's do it. Um, no, I think most of us don't see ourselves as part of the solution. I didn't see
mm,
myself as somebody who could be in Congress until I did. And you hear these stories all the time on the Hill of, especially women are like, well, I was a stay-at-home mom, but then I got really furious about this issue and I started going to my school board and then I was at City Hall and now I'm running for Congress. And I think when somebody comes to one of us, a lot of us are in the kind of positions where people come to us and say, I'm concerned about this, or I'm furious about the way you voted on that, whatever. If we invite people to come in and be part of the conversation, then I think they start seeing themselves. It is easy to be on the outside throwing rocks at
it is.
whatever's happening, even for members of Congress, honestly. But as soon as someone is upset enough to show up and maybe even with a rock that they want to throw, and you can say, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for reaching out. Let's help you be part of this. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you're hearing, what you're seeing. Then that changes. When you have the ability, when you have a voice and some sway, then you're less likely to just throw
Yeah.
rocks, more likely to roll up your sleeves. And what I've learned, like selfishly for my own self-interest, when I get people to feel like they're invested in me, they go tell their neighbors, and I have to get elected to keep this job. So if I'm
True. True.
everybody mad, I'm a short timer here, but if I can get people involved, even when they disagree with me, then they may trust me to keep working, even if they don't like every vote I take.
Thank you. That's awesome. I like that. My follow-up to that, Natalie, if you have a quick comment for this, is one of the things when I use the word public policy various places, there's some people that makes really nervous. They just have never seen them in the space of public policy. So that same question, I was thinking while you were talking, how do you see, because we want more people involved in public policy, really good, informed people involved in public policy. For both of you, how do we get more women? Let's stick with women on this. How do we get more women to see themselves as part of a public policy solution? Does that make sense? So same question, but really, any thoughts? Love comments from each of you.
Natalie, you go first. I'm going to grab water.
Okay.
Oh, listen, I think this is a natural. I mean, women, we got it all, right? We know we have intelligence, we have roles in our families, we have these incredible abilities to collaborate and to I like to think of stewardship as a feminine value, beauty as a feminine value, and I think you just basically have to go where your interests are. If
Yeah.
you love arboretums and beauty, then go fight for park spending. If you're all about special education, get involved there. And you find on Capitol Hill, of course, that it's the people that aren't up there all the time that have the most influence.
Yeah.
They get so not
That's
tired, but it's
interesting.
just the same people all the time, paid lobbyists, if you will. But when a group of mothers
Oh,
shows up and says third grade reading is a problem, invest more, I think it makes a difference.
I love that.
Yeah, I can verify the truth of that. That is the difference between a really passionate mom showing up to talk about something versus a lobbyist with several talking points is huge. I also think we have to see other women in these
Yeah.
positions to recognize how powerful it can be. I agree with what Natalie said. I think women are naturally, we're problem solvers, we're coalition builders. I tell people all the time, if you survive junior high as a girl, you have all of the skills you need to be in politics. Is
Amen. That's a beautiful
junior
comment.
high in the world here.
That's
Um,
funny.
and but I think sometimes we don't see women doing these things, and
No.
it makes it intimidating to get involved. And I'm just going to say it, sometimes women are too darn hard on other women. So the few women we have who are in some of these
Mhm.
positions that are out there, like it makes you a really concentrated target. They're
Mm,
spread the criticism very wide when there aren't very many of us.
yeah.
And but my experience has been that as soon as you put yourself out there, you throw your name in the hat and people know you're all in and you're going for it, other women will show up for you in ways that are so shocking and humbling. I mean, I had women out talking to their neighbors and setting up
Oh, I
meetings
love
and
that.
pounding signs, women who didn't know me, but they wanted to give their neighbors a chance to hear from me and make a choice. And so I think we have to be out there doing things and showing little girls and young women and our moms and everybody that it can be
Yeah,
done. But we've also got to be willing to give each other the benefit of the doubt. There are going to be some
I
women
love that.
who just aren't good leaders, but let's hear them out and find out before we throw them out based on their lipstick or their hairstyle or whatever.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, it's in addition to being role models or just having people see what, that they could do that to girls and young women and women. Our boys and young men and men need to see that too, so it becomes more natural. I think we're going in that direction, but I don't know, there's a ebb and flow a little bit, so we don't know where things are at this point. So I have been wanting to ask you this question. So about public trust. We know public trust in general is fragile, right? It's gone up and down. So I would love to have you talk about how at this time in our history, how can we build back up those good pieces, that trust with our constituents, with stakeholders, with communities, with people we, you know, that we're interacting with. I guess my first comment at that would be always tell the truth. But what would you both say to that?
Natalie, I'm going to go first on this one because you probably have good data to back you up, and I'm just going to have some anecdotal evidence.
Mhm.
But what I've tried to do is make sure that I'm maybe over communicative and as
Mm,
honest as I can possibly be in this job. And I talk with my staff all the time, like, let's not talk jargon to people. Let's explain the tough votes, the tough issues, the tough policy, the way you would explain it to your grandma on the phone on a Sunday afternoon.
okay.
If we're using a bunch of hill speak, we're doing it wrong. But if we're explaining it so a really bright fifth grader could follow along, then we're doing it right. And I think that's what builds trust. I have had people tell me, I hate the way you voted on that, but I really appreciate that you put out a video explaining your vote. Builds
Okay.
trust. It may not build up, that person may never vote for me, but it builds up trust that the people who are out representing us are willing to be accountable. They're willing to be transparent. And we need that trust in our system. Our system will fail if
Yeah.
we don't have some basic level of trust. If we have to be on our guard and treat
Yeah.
everybody as hostile, we just cannot function
Yeah.
in a free society.
Yeah. I hope that settles down a bit so we can start building that trust back up. Natalie, any thoughts about that?
Oh, I mean, when you mention it, the term that comes to my mind, we always use that term that trust is the coin of the realm. Coin of the
Mm,
realm. And what that really means is it's like the currency. It's what it has to be there for parties with differing opinions to figure things out. In our state, I'm sitting there thinking, Congresswoman Maloy thinks I've got data, so I got to think, what data do I have?
yeah.
We do know absolutely empirically that social capital or networks of
Mm,
trust are on decline in the nation and in our state. Of course, we also know that Utah's social capital is better than any state. And I think the other thing
yeah.
that I just add is when we talk about social capital, so networks of trust, they break that down. There's bonding social capital. That's similar people that bond together. There's bridging social capital. Those are different kinds of people that make, a bridge to one another. And then there's linking social capital, which is basically different socioeconomic groups coming together. And we need, in Utah, we're really good at the bonding, in my opinion, because we have a lot of common values. But the bridging we struggle with. We have to get better at urban, rural, LDS,
Yeah.
non-LDS, young, old, BYU, Utah. It's
I
that
wondered if you
bridging.
were going to bring that one up.
Yeah, it's the bridging that I'd like to see more of.
Oh, that's
And
if you have a resource, an article that you like, maybe you don't, or a book, let's put it in the follow-up email to everybody listening if you have anything written on that.
Great.
can I just add one thing, Susan, before
Oh,
I move on?
please.
I'm watching it spill over too. I think having a healthy level of distrust of your government is probably a good thing. Like we believe that individuals can hold their government accountable. But what I've noticed the last few years is we treat everything with that same level of arm's distance mistrust, including, universities and uh,
Yeah,
experts. And it's even starting to be that way with religion. And that healthy level of distrust when we're holding, our elected officials to account is not always a healthy level
yeah,
with
yeah,
friends and family and other institutions. And we've got to start being able to see some of that and recognize the
yeah.
difference of am I in a position here where I have the knowledge to be this skeptical, or is it just a habit?
Yeah.
I love that.
And
So,
Susan, my
oh,
book, my resource would be Upswing,
oh,
the book
yeah,
Upswing by Robert Putnam and Shailene Romney Garrett.
I like that. Yeah,
Great book
perfect.
about how our level of connectedness has been in decline since Eisenhower, but we can get on the upswing because we did it before,
Yeah,
between the Gilded
I
Age
love
and
that.
Eisenhower.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Final thoughts, maybe 30, I know we're at time, but just a few thoughts. Natalie, let's have you start. I mean, a reminder, the title of this was really Women Leading Public Policy Change, Strategic Voices. What just final thoughts for those listening do you have? And then Congresswoman will end with you.
Sounds great. My final thought is get good at change. Change is everywhere. It's exhilarating. Um, if you want a good resource there, go to John Cotter's book on leading change.
Have it on my
The
shelf.
Yeah, the idea is that in a time of change, you have to have urgency, you have to have guiding coalitions, you've got to have a change vision that you communicate, you've got to have short-term wins. I'm trying to remember some of the other ones, anchor in new approaches and
Yep.
embed it in culture. So I'm all about, I think leadership is about seeing around corners. And there's this famous quote I'll end with that is, you can fight change and die. You can accept change and survive, or you can lead change and prosper.
Ah,
And that's where we need to be as women and as leaders in this community.
thank you so much. Celeste or Congresswoman.
I answered either one. So a woman who is a mentor of mine told me a few years ago there are two kinds of women leaders. There's the queen bees who like to believe that they're the only ones who could have possibly accomplished what they've accomplished, and they burn the bridge behind them to prove that nobody else could do it. And then there are the bridge builders who try to make sure that people who come along behind them have an easier time because they've already accomplished something. And I think there are some actually rational reasons for women to try to be queen bees. And I think it's just something that we've got to watch out for, make sure that we are, I'm not blazing this trail. It was blazed by women before me. But if I can make it a little wider, a little smoother, if I can put some signs in place for other women who come along behind me, that's something that I think doesn't just happen. We all have to pay attention to it because there are perverse incentives sometimes. And then the other thing I would say to all the women who are on here is go get involved. I'm confident my dad's not on here is the only reason I dare say this, but my dad likes to sit at home and yell at the news. And the people on the news cannot hear him. It doesn't do anything to move the needle in politics. I think it feels good for a second. But I have a sister-in-law who's never been at all involved in politics. And now that I'm in politics, she gets my newsletter and she's like, wait, you can call your congressman? Luckily, she doesn't live in my district. She lives in Nevada and she calls Susie Lee's office all the time and
Oh,
lets them know what she thinks about things. And it's great because if you're calling, you've got a chance of changing things. If you're sitting at home being furious, you're not going to change anything policy-wise, but you are going to drive your family crazy. You're going to cause more distrust in your inner circle, but you're not going to have any influence on your outer circle. And sometimes I think as women, we almost think it's noble to, stay out and to be above the fray and to say, I don't really like politics. I don't go in for contention, but we do care about things. And if we don't
Yep.
find outlets for taking that caring and that passion to make it better, then it's going to turn into yelling at the TV, whatever your version of that is. And that doesn't build bridges at home or in the community or in the state so get involved. That's my, if you get nothing else out of this,
I
go,
love it.
whatever it is you care about, go do it and do it hard.
I love that. And I always recommend to people to, of course, I'm going to say read our reports, read Natalie's reports, read our reports. Just get engaged. You don't know sometimes what you're even passionate about until you read a short report on a topic and say, that's not right. Or we need to make sure more kids in our elementary schools are reading. Like they're doing the steps for reading and all of those things. Thank you to both of you for joining. This is just so meaningful that you came in today. And for all of you, thank you so much. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Utah State University Extension. And also just a reminder that tomorrow I'm actually doing another one with Abby Cox called Leading with Compassion, a conversation with Utah's First Lady, Abby Cox. And then next week, we have another one with several women leaders on leadership levers driving women's career progress. So thanks again to everybody for joining, and a special thanks, Natalie, to you and to Congresswoman Maloy. Thank you for joining me today.